The drive to my brother's house takes 22 minutes on a good day. That evening it took 38 because I had to pull over twice, once at the Walgreens on Carpenter Street because my hands were shaking too hard to hold the wheel, and once at the entrance to their neighborhood because I needed to sit in the dark for a moment and remind myself that I was not the one who had done something wrong. My name is Claire. I was 31 years old that October, and I was on my way to drop off a birthday gift for my nephew, a boy I love more than most things in this world, when my brother Marcus sent me a text that said, "Family dinner is off this weekend, nothing personal, everyone's just tired." I had already bought the cake. I had it in a box on the passenger seat, the kind with the blue frosting my nephew had specifically requested because he had seen it at a party and talked about it for 6 weeks. I sent back a simple okay, and kept driving anyway, because the cake was already there, and because some part of me understood, in the way you understand things you are not ready to say out loud, that the dinner had not actually been cancelled. The lights in Marcus's house were on when I turned onto their street. Every window, the kind of warmth that spills out onto a front lawn and makes a house look the way houses look in holiday photographs. I parked 2 houses down the way you do when you are not sure what you are walking into, and I carried the cake box up the sidewalk because I had driven 22 minutes and my nephew was 8 years old and none of this was his fault. I could hear them before I reached the front step. My sister-in-law Diane's laugh first, the one she uses when she wants a room to know she is having a good time. Then my father's voice, slower and warmer than it had been in months, the voice he uses when he is comfortable. And then my brother, clear through the front window that was cracked 2 inches against the warmth of the kitchen. "She just doesn't get it, Dad. She never has. She thinks because she ran the numbers for 3 years that she built something. She didn't build anything. We let her help." My father said something I could not fully hear. Marcus laughed. I stood on the front step with a birthday cake for my nephew and I did not knock. I do not entirely know why. Some instinct, maybe. The same one that makes you stop moving when you hear a sound in the dark before you understand what it is. I stood there for another few seconds and I heard enough my name used the way people use names when the person is not in the room, as a problem to be discussed, a variable to be managed, and then I walked back to my car and sat in the driver's seat and called the one person I knew would answer on the first ring. Her name is Priya. She has been my closest friend since we were both 23 and working 80-hour weeks at the same regional accounting firm, surviving on coffee and the specific dark humor of people who process other people's money for a living. She answered before the second ring and she did not say hello. She said what happened, because she knows the difference between my regular calls and the other kind. I told her what I had heard. She was quiet for a moment in the particular way Priya is quiet when she is thinking rather than reacting. Then she said, "Claire, how long have you actually had access to the business accounts?" I told her I had been the primary financial manager for Hargrove Family Properties for 4 years. My father's real estate operation, 3 residential properties, and a commercial unit on Aldine Avenue, assets that he had built steadily over 20 years, and that he had asked me to help manage when his eyesight began making the detailed work difficult. Marcus handled the physical side, the contractors, the tenant relationships, the maintenance calls. I handled the books. That had been the arrangement, spoken clearly and agreed to, for 4 years. What Priya said next was careful. She told me that 2 weeks earlier her firm had been contacted for a referral by a private real estate attorney she had worked with before, someone putting together documentation for a portfolio transfer. The referral had been routine. She had not connected it to me until that moment, standing in my brother's front yard with a birthday cake, because the name on the inquiry had been Hargrove Holdings, LLC, not Hargrove Family Properties. I asked her what the difference was. She told me to go home, lock my door, and pull every document I had access to before morning. I did not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table in my apartment with my laptop and my external drive and every folder I had ever kept, methodical in the way that 4 years of financial management makes you methodical, and I began to understand the shape of what had been happening around me while I was looking at it directly. Hargrove Holdings, LLC, had been registered 8 months ago. Marcus was the sole managing member. The registered address was a mail forwarding service in a suburb I had never heard of. The 3 residential properties my father owned had been transferred into the LLC's name over a period of 6 months through a series of quitclaim deeds that my father had signed, one at a time, at a notary office 40 minutes from his house. The transfers had been recorded quietly, each one a few weeks apart, the kind of spacing that keeps things from appearing clustered when you run a search. The commercial property on Aldine Avenue was the last one still in my father's name. It was also the most valuable. The transaction documents Priya's contact had referenced were for that property. The timeline on the paperwork had the transfer completing within 30 days. I already knew, sitting there in the quiet of my kitchen at 2 in the morning, what the money from that sale was going to be used for. Marcus and Diane had been carrying debt for years, the kind that accumulates when your lifestyle is built on an income you expect to eventually have rather than the one you currently do. They had refinanced their house twice. They drove cars with payments that made me uncomfortable when I ran the household budget they had once asked me to help them organize, a request they had later acted as though had never happened. My father was 71 years old. He trusted Marcus. He had always trusted Marcus in the specific way that parents sometimes trust the child who asks for less, not understanding that asking for less up front is occasionally a strategy. I made myself eat something before I called him. I fried an egg and ate it standing at the counter because I knew that what came next would require me to be steady, and I had not been eating the way I should have been for weeks. My father answered on the third ring, his voice carrying the particular thickness of someone woken from deep sleep. I told him I was sorry to call so early. I told him I needed to see him that morning, alone, before he spoke to Marcus about anything. There was a pause on his end that lasted long enough for me to understand that some part of him already knew what the shape of the conversation was going to be. He said, "How bad is it?" I told him to make sure Diane was not there when I arrived. He lived 20 minutes from my apartment. I pulled into his driveway at 7:15 and he was already at the kitchen table with coffee made, 2 cups, which meant he had been awake before I called. He looked older than he had at the family dinner 2 months ago. Not frail, my father is not a frail person, but smaller, somehow, compressed. I put the folder on the table between us. I had organized it the way I organize everything, chronologically, with the amounts and the dates and the corresponding records from the original Hargrove family properties accounts. I walked him through it slowly. He did not interrupt. He put his reading glasses on and looked at each page the way he used to look at papers when I was small and he was checking my homework, careful, the way someone looks at something they want to understand completely before they say anything. When I finished, he took his glasses off and set them on the table. He said, "He told me it was tax planning." I told him as gently as I could that it was not tax planning. He was quiet for a long time. My father is a man who processes things internally, who does not perform his emotions for the people around him, and I had learned a long time ago to let him have his silence without trying to fill it. What I had not expected was the thing he said when he finally spoke. He said, "He told me you knew. He said you were part of it, that you had helped set it up, and that if I had any questions I should ask you." I sat with that for a moment. I asked him when Marcus had told him this. He said, 3 weeks ago. I thought about the text message that had canceled the family dinner. I thought about my nephew's birthday cake sitting in my car in the dark. I thought about the phrase "we let her help," delivered through a cracked window to a room full of people who were eating my father's food in my father's house. I told my father very clearly that I had not known anything, that I had found the LLC registration the night before, and that I would prove it to him in whatever way he needed. He looked at me for a long time the way parents look at their children when they are trying to separate the person they raised from the story someone else has told them, and then he nodded, once, and pushed his coffee cup toward me and said, "Then we need to figure out what to do." What we did first was call Priya. She came to my father's house that morning with her work bag and a referral number for a real estate attorney who specialized in exactly this kind of situation, which is a situation that has a name and a legal framework and, as it turned out, a reasonably well-defined set of remedies. The attorney's name was Patricia Osei, and she had a voice like someone who has spent 20 years being the calmest person in rooms where other people were falling apart. Patricia told us that the quitclaim transfers, depending on how they had been obtained, could constitute financial elder abuse under state law. She told us that the 60-day window before the Aldine Avenue transaction completed gave us enough time to file for an injunction if the documentation supported it. She told us we needed to establish, clearly and on record, that my father had not been fully informed of what he was signing. My father, who is not a man who uses the words I didn't understand lightly, said to Patricia very quietly, "My son told me I was signing updated insurance documents." Patricia wrote something down and did not change her expression, which I understood to be professionalism. The following 3 weeks were the kind of weeks that rearrange the interior of a person. I went to work. I came home. I helped Priya and Patricia build the documentation file, cross-referencing the transfer dates with the notary records and my father's medical appointment schedule to establish that 3 of the 4 signings had occurred on days when he had early morning appointments that would have left him fatigued and less likely to read carefully. I did not call Marcus. I did not respond to the 2 texts he sent me asking if I had spoken to Dad lately, breezy and casual, the tone of someone who believes the situation is still under control. What I did do was agree, when my sister-in-law Diane called to invite me to a dinner they were hosting for my father's birthday, to come. My father's birthday fell on a Saturday that year. Diane had organized a dinner at their house, 12 people, family and 2 couples who were my father's oldest friends, people who had known Marcus and me since we were children. The kind of event where things said have witnesses. I arrived on time, which I understood would read as normalcy. Priya sat in her car at the end of the block and did not come inside, because what she was doing required her to be where she was and not in the dining room. I had given her copies of everything Patricia had prepared. Marcus opened the door. He had the look of a man who believes he has finished something, the particular ease of someone who thinks the hard part is behind him. He hugged me the way he always hugs me, that brief, back-patting hug that has never once felt warm, and said he was glad I came, and I said of course, and stepped inside. My father was in the living room with his oldest friend Raymond, talking about something to do with a car engine, and when he saw me he stood up and crossed the room and held onto my shoulder for a moment with the grip of someone who is not going to say out loud what they mean but wants you to know it. I squeezed his hand back. Dinner was Diane's short ribs, which she is genuinely good at, and the conversation was the ordinary kind, Raymond's grandchildren, a neighbor's renovation that had run over budget, the weather in November. Marcus sat at the head of the table in the chair that had been my father's chair for 30 years and served the wine with the ease of someone who has already decided how an inheritance works. After the cake store-bought, not the specific kind my nephew would have requested, Marcus tapped his glass. He said he wanted to say something about legacy, about what it means to build something as a family and have it continue. He said my father had always understood that the people who do the visible work, who show up, who put their hands on things, are the ones who carry something forward. He looked at me once, briefly, while he said this, and I held his gaze for exactly as long as I needed to, and then looked at my father. My father said he had something he wanted to say as well. Marcus smiled and gestured for him to go ahead. My father is not a man who speaks at length when a few words will do. He said he had been going through some paperwork recently, with help, and that he had come to understand some things he had not understood before. He said he wanted to be clear, in front of the people who mattered to him, about where things stood. He said the transfers Marcus had described as tax planning had been reversed that Tuesday, pending the outcome of a legal review. He said the Aldine Avenue property was no longer part of any planned sale. He said he had filed a report with the County Elder Services Office, as Patricia had advised, because the law required it and because it was the accurate thing to do. He said all of this in the same tone he uses to talk about car engines, level and unhurried. While Marcus's face moved through several expressions in a short period of time and Diane put down her fork. I did not look at Marcus. I watched Raymond, who had known my father since 1987, set his napkin beside his plate with the careful deliberateness of a man deciding how to be useful. Marcus said, "Dad, this is not you don't understand what you're—" My father said, "I understand exactly, Marcus." Claire explained it to me. What happened next is not something I will reconstruct in detail. Voices were raised. Diane used the word ungrateful in a way that was meant to land on me, and instead landed on the table between all of us like something that couldn't be taken back. Marcus said several things about loyalty and about who had actually been present, and I sat quietly through all of it because Patricia had told me that anything I said in that room could be part of a record, and because I had already said what needed saying 3 weeks earlier, at a kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee. Marcus and Diane left before the rest of the guests. I watched from the front window as their car pulled out of the driveway too fast, the way people drive when they are still having an argument with someone who is no longer there. Raymond stayed and helped my father clean up. He did not say very much about what had happened, which was the correct response. He said to me, once, quietly, near the sink, "You did the right thing at the right time, and that is rarer than people think." The legal process took 5 months. The property transfers were fully reversed. The Aldine Avenue sale did not proceed. There was no criminal charge in the end, though Patricia had explained that what had occurred met the statutory definition in a way that would have supported one. My father made the decision about how far he wanted to take it, and I understood that decision even when I did not entirely agree with it. What mattered to him was not punishment. What mattered was that it stopped. Marcus sent me an email 4 months later. It was long and it moved through several phases: explanation, grievance, something adjacent to remorse, and I read it once and did not respond. Not from anger, or not only. Some communications, I have learned, are sent to reopen a door that you have closed for your own good reasons, and the most useful response is sometimes none at all. I changed my number in January. I sent a brief note to the family members who needed to know, clear about what had happened and equally clear about the fact that I was not seeking input on the decision. In February, I did something for myself that I had been thinking about for a long time. I found a 2-bedroom apartment closer to my father's neighborhood, with a second room I use for work, a proper office, shelves and a real desk, and a door that closes a space I have built entirely around what I need it to be rather than what anyone else requires of it. I hung one photograph on the wall, a picture of my father and me at a property he bought when I was 9 years old, the first one, both of us squinting into the sun in front of a house that needed everything. He called me the night I moved in. He asked if the new place was what I had hoped for. I told him it was exactly what I needed. He said good. In that way he has that carries more than the word itself. I have thought a great deal, in the months since, about what it means to be the person in a family who keeps track of things. Who remembers the dates and organizes the paperwork and arrives with the right gift at the right time and drives 40 minutes in the dark because a child asked for a specific kind of cake. There is a version of that role that is generosity. There is another version that is an invitation, extended without your knowledge, for the people around you to treat your reliability as a resource they are entitled to draw down. I was useful to my family in ways that I was proud of. I was also useful to them in ways I had not agreed to and would not have, if anyone had thought to ask. The accounting work and the asset transfers and the narrative Marcus had constructed to preempt my objections, all of it required me to be present and capable and, at the same time, not quite fully in the room. The people who took from my father were not people I understood to be capable of it. That is the sentence I have come back to the most. Not because it excuses anything, but because it is honest. I had a brother I believed I knew. I had a family role I believed I understood. Both of those things were true and also insufficient, and the distance between what I knew and what was actually happening is the distance I have spent this year learning to see clearly. My father's birthday, the real one, the quiet dinner I cooked for him in March at my new apartment, he sat at my kitchen table and asked me what I had learned from all of it, the way he used to ask about difficult things when I was young, straightforwardly, with the expectation of a real answer. I told him I had learned that being dependable is not the same as being valued, that the two can exist separately for a very long time before you are forced to understand the difference. He thought about that for a moment, then he said, I should have seen it sooner. I told him that was not the part he needed to carry. He nodded, and we finished dinner, and I washed the dishes, and he dried them the way he has always dried dishes, thorough and unhurried, and that is the version of that evening I intend to keep. Have you ever been the person in your family who kept everything running? Who knew the numbers and remembered the dates and showed up and found out that your presence had been treated as a resource rather than a relationship? What was the moment you finally saw the difference, and what did you do with it?